Wetlands and retention areas are an important part of landscapes, and in cities, a lot of times now, there actually are requirements in new neighborhoods for water retention areas. So I am at the UT Garden in Knoxville, Tennessee with Andrea Ludwig, and she's going to tell us about their wetland area here at the UT Garden.
Yeah.
Andrea, thanks for being with us, and fill me in a little bit on the design and development of this wetland here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your interest in this topic. Yeah, having a water feature in your yard can be a really big interest and bring new wildlife and new plants, new planting opportunities to your yard. Tennessee's a wet state, so we have a lot of precipitation and a lot of water to manage in the landscape because of that. And so here at the Wetland Gardens at the UT Gardens, we're doing just that. This area is a naturally low-lying area, and it catches that runoff from about 6.5 acres of the UT Gardens and some of the parking areas and structures, and that water collects here. And so before we turned it into a wetland, it collected that water because of the natural low-lying of the area.
So it was just kind of a low spot on the property anyway.
Absolutely, and that water would stick around long enough to create a challenge for mowing and a lot of, of the plants that they were planting here, but not long enough to really create a natural wetland. So it's kind of that in-between zone and made it a real challenging part of the landscape.
And probably it also was a mosquito breeding area. And
Potentially, yes. And so we needed to give this area just a nudge towards more of the actual wetland function that we needed here. And so to do that, we did some excavation, we did a little bit of grading and groundwork. We brought in some liners to make these permanent pools here. And then we were able to plant the native wetland plants that you see here because we were able to change the hydrology.
So even though this looks completely natural, it is a built landscape, and the ponds are actually lined.
They are. The ponds are lined up to about the water's edge, and then in between the ponds, we have 4 ponds total, actually 3 of which are lined. 1 is not lined, so it's more of your kind of like seasonal wetland.
It comes and goes.
And then these 3 perennial ponds. In between here though, when it rains, we've got porous land in between, and so it can accept that runoff, but then the water recedes and soaks into the ground in between rain events.
This is really built to be an ecosystem.
Absolutely, that is exactly right. So we are trying to manage this challenging water area and then turning it into an ecosystem, really leveraging the natural functions of a wetland to enhance the beauty, but then also the function of the landscape. So we're absorbing runoff, we're also capturing any potential pollutants that are in that runoff, and then we're creating these beautiful spaces to plant.
In this setting, you have, I'm assuming, dragonflies?
Yes.
Probably frogs?
Yes, absolutely.
What other kinds of wildlife do you experience here in the wetland?
Yeah, so in addition to dragonflies, and I'll talk a little bit more about dragonflies in a moment, but a lot of our terrestrial insects start their life in the water. And so we get a lot of the aquatic insects in our wetland ponds here. So damselflies, dragonflies, water beetles, water striders, mayflies, stoneflies. These are insects that we recognize as in their terrestrial form, but they actually start their life in the water. With dragonflies in particular, I'm glad you brought those up because we actually create a wetland to have the habitat that dragonflies need, because dragonflies and damselflies in particular are mosquito predators. And so you can imagine when we talk about wetlands in our residential and urban spaces, mosquitoes is the #1 question, right?
A
the
big
#1
concern.
challenge, absolutely. But if we can build the ecosystem here, provide the habitat for those predators, that means we have a functioning food web. We've got our damselflies, dragonflies, water beetles, things that are going to eat mosquitoes in their larval stage, and then that way they don't have a chance to make it out and bite us. So we really are recreating that food web, creating the habitat for those predators, and creating that ecosystem.
It's amazing to me that you can do that in a small space like this, because where we're standing, even though it probably looks rather large on camera, it's the walkway is 40 feet or so. The pond is maybe 30 by 50, something like that. It's not a huge space, and it's something that could be done with the right setting. If you had a low spot in your yard, if you had an area that naturally collected water that you were concerned about or maybe wanted to do something pretty with, you could create a natural area like this.
Absolutely. Yeah, something like this is feasible in your in your yard, but even if you just have a downspout. I've seen dragonfly habitats. Simple downspout is the source of that runoff water from your house, and feeding that into a really small kind of micro wetland, that's enough as long as you've got that permanent pool of water, you've got some vegetation that is emerging from the water. That's what the dragonflies need to complete their life cycle. So it's this emergent vegetation around the edge that's so important.
So let's talk then a little bit about vegetation.
Let's do.
Part of it. What kind of plants are going to thrive in this sort of setting?
Lots of different types of plants, and you can kind of think of a wetland edge as having different zones. So we'll have plants that will thrive in kind of that deep water environment, so our submerged aquatic vegetation. So think lily pads. This spatter dock right here is a great example that's in that deeper water environment. When we get closer to the edge, about 4 inches of submerged area, we've got our broadleaf arrowhead, bull-tongue arrowhead. We've got pickerel weed, wonderful purple blooms that attracts pollinators as well. And that's the emergent vegetation that the dragonfly nymphs will climb out onto and take off their exoskeleton and then morphosize into their adult form. So that emergent layer, right at the water's edge, you can see riparian plants and water-loving species. We've got some lizard's tail right here. We've got some of our native hibiscus, our marsh mallow, back in the background there. Some asters and goldenrod coming in. And then you can think also above the water line, some of these shrubs. These are, again, riparian plants you would find around water bodies naturally.
Sure. I notice on the surface of the water, I think for those of us who have ornamental ponds, let's just call them ornamental ponds, koi ponds, goldfish ponds, we're growing water lilies, that kind of thing. Duckweed is sort of our nemesis in that situation, but here, it's an important part of what's going on.
It is, yes. Duckweed is a really interesting and valuable plant. Some folks might confuse it with it being algae. It's actually a vascular plant, as you know. It's got a leaf and a root, so it's a vascular plant.
And it just floats on the water surface.
And it just floats on the water surface. It is a valuable food source for a lot of wildlife, in particular ducks, but it's really high, nutritious, very dense food for a lot of wildlife. And it also helps to keep our water clean. It keeps it shaded, so the temperature of the water column is cooler. That means more dissolved oxygen in it, and it can help take out some of those pollutants in our water.
Right, and because it covers the water surface, it's not allowing sunlight down, so that actually probably helps with the algae issue, which is a negative.
Yes, yes, that is true. So duckweed can be a really great part of the ecosystem. So
even though this area seems like it might be fairly large for an average homeowner, then you can shrink this down. You can scale it down to whatever size might fit in your own yard.
I would throw out a tip that about 2 feet deep is the depth of the permanent pool that we want to target, because that will, in these dry times like we're having right now, that will be able to withstand the kind of the evapotranspiration losses.
Okay, so a minimum of 2 feet.
Yeah, 2 feet will get you that permanent pool and that habitat that we need for our predators and the whole ecosystem to thrive.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today, and for letting our viewers know that something like this is possible. You can create these very viable, lively ecosystems right at home in your own backyard.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
For inspiring garden tours, growing tips, and garden projects, visit our website at volunteergardener.org or on YouTube at the Volunteer Gardener channel, and like us on Facebook.